Hello, my beautiful people. This is yours truly, Christine, with Exhibit Africa Inc. I'm glad to be back once again to share some more fun and interesting facts about the art, culture, and lifestyle of another beautiful country from the continent of Africa. And the country today we're going to be talking about, or I'm going to be sharing some information on, is Guinea-Bissau. If you've been following my series, I want to thank you for that. However, if you're new and you've missed out on the other series, I would advise you to check back in my previous videos. I'm going in the alphabetical order. So we started off with Algeria. Right now, we are on the letter G, which stands for Guinea-Bissau, Gabon, Gambia. But we're not there yet. I'm not going to get ahead of this. So let's stick to Guinea-Bissau right now. But before we get oriented about Guinea-Bissau, I just want to remind you that there is three countries on the continent of Africa that go by the name Guinea. So we have Guinea, then we have Equatorial Guinea, and then we have Guinea-Bissau. So those are three different countries. So we're not going to confuse the other two with the one we're talking about today. Okay, so let's get some orientation about this beautiful country. Okay, the name Guinea was used by European explorers and traders to refer the coast of West Africa. It comes from an Arab term meaning the land of the blacks. Bissau is the name of the capital. Maybe it might be a corruption of the Bijago, the name of the ethnic group that inhabits the dozen of small islands along the coast. The combined name distinguishes the country from its southern neighbor, Guinea. All right, so let's move on to the location and geography of Guinea-Bissau. Okay, so it's one of the smallest and yet poorest West African nations. It is surrounded by former French colonies, sharing a border in the north with Senegal, and to the south with Guinea. It has a land area of 13,944 square miles. The terrain is generally flat and nearly at sea level, although there are hills in the southern eastern region. Wide tidal estuaries surrounded by mangrove swamps penetrate 40 miles into the interior, where the coastal rainforest gives way to the sparsely wooded savanna. All right, so moving on, let's check out the demography of Guinea. In 1998, the population was at 1.2 million people. The population is 76% rural, but almost 20% of the inhabitants live in the capital city. More than half of the citizens were born after independence in 1974. The Fula and the Mandinga, who are traditionally politically centralized and make up the Muslim majority in the interior, account for nearly 30% of the population. Balanta, Manjako, and Papel in the coastal and tidal zone constitute of a sizable demographic majority. Let's move on to the language. Government documents are written in Portuguese. Students beyond the first few years of elementary school are taught in Portuguese, and government officials speak in that language. However, only 10% of the citizens are fluent in Portuguese. The national lingua franca is Creole, which is derived primarily from the Portuguese. Almost all Guineans born after 1974 know Creole, although most speak it as a second language. Creole developed in the era of slave trading, when it was used for communication between Portuguese merchant administrators and the local populations. It became the primary language for the Cape Verdeans, who were descendants of West African slaves and resettled in Portuguese coastal enclaves. These people were employed by the government in the lower levels of the colonial bureaucracy and engaged in local commercial activities. Creole became the de facto national language during the struggle for liberation between 1961 and 1974. Today, Creole is associated with an urban ethnic minority that identifies itself as Cape Verdean. It is also the language of national identity. Patriotic songs and slogans are invariably in Creole, and the national news broadcast is in that language. Most residents are comfortable speaking local African languages. Close to half of the population is monolingual in a local language. Balanta, Manjako, and Pepel speak related but mutually unintelligent languages that are distantly related to languages spoken in Senegal. The language of the Bijangos Islanders of the coast is unrelated to that of any neighboring group. The languages spoken by the Mandinga and the Fula allow them to communicate with their cultural kin in the neighboring regions. Okay, moving on. Let's move on to the national flag of Senegal. I beg your pardon, the national flag of Guinea-Bissau. The flag with horizontal stripes of green, red, and yellow and black star in the center reflects an explicit concern to define the country in terms of national liberation as well as Pan-African rather than ethnic. During the revolution, efforts were made to minimize ethnic distinctions, and this effort is reflected in the persuasive views. All right, let's move on to the flag. The flag with horizontal stripes of green, red, and yellow and black star in the center reflects an explicit concern to define the country in terms of national liberation and as a Pan-African rather than ethnic. During the revolution, efforts were made to minimize ethnic distinctions, and this effort is reflected in the persuasive use of Creole as the language of political slogans and patriotic celebration. Schools and avenues are named after heroes of the revolution, such as Domingos Ramos, who was killed while leading the first organized guerrilla battalion. Pan-African matters to national liberation, such as Patrick Lumumba, are similarly enshrined. Okay, let's get into the history of Guinea-Bissau, shall we? All right, by the 16th century, Europe traders had settled permanent trading posts along the coast and encouraged local people to raid their neighbors as slaves. The slave trade created and reinforced ethnic distinctions in the region. Bijagos became notorious slave raiders, and the Manjako and Papel produced food for the coastal trading posts, along with trade goods such as elaborately patterned textiles. So they were actually using communities to attack each other. Okay, moving on. At the end of the slave trade in the mid-19th century, Bijagos maintained their independence. At the end of the slave trade in the mid-19th century, Bijagos maintained their independence until the 1930s. The Makanjo and the Pepel were among the first people in the region to migrate to Cape Verde and European Pontus or concessions to sharecrop peanuts. They were active in the wild rubber trade in the early 20th century, migrating to Senegal and Gambia. The end of the slave trade led to political collapse and chaos among the more politically centralized Muslim groups in the interior. As Muslim factions fought, they also raided the coast, leading to confrontations with the European traders. Whoa. The nation began as a colony consisting of the mainland territory and the islands of Cape Verde. Not until the first decades of the 20th century where the Portuguese were able to control the territory. Until then, the Portuguese had ruled only only the coastal enclaves and were the virtual hostages of their African hosts. who controlled food and water supplies. In 1931, the Portuguese under Teixeira Pinto allied themselves with the Fuller troops and under Abdullahi Ijal and defeated all the coastal groups. Then the Portuguese exploited divisions among the Muslims to destroy Injai and his followers, becoming the sole power in the region. Wow. Okay, during the Salazarist era, the Portuguese built roads, bridges, hospitals, and schools. At the beginning of the 1960s, their rule was contested by African nationalists under the leadership of Amilcar Cabral. By 1974, then Portugal recognized the nation's independence, and the nationalistic forces had developed a political and economic infrastructure, providing basic services for the majority of the local residents. Wow, okay, let's look at the national identity. The success of the revolutionary struggle created a strong sense of national identity, which was reinforced by linguistic distinctiveness because of their upheaval caused by the war for liberation. Large numbers of residents migrated to neighboring countries and to Europe. Efforts to liberalize the economy and democratize the political system has led to corruption and exacerbated the gap between the wealth government officials and the citizen. As a result, the nation state has come to be perceived as a platform for enriching oneself and one's family, and a source of passports and identity papers that allow people to escape from the nation. I think this is not any different from some other African countries. Moving on, let's talk about the ethnic relations in Guinea-Bissau. In the current national elections, ethnically based parties have not been successful. As the nation becomes increasingly divided economically, ethnicity has become a way to mobilize factions. Recent coup attempts have divided the military, and animosity toward the wealth may be increasing, directed at Cape Verdans. Persons of Cape Verde descent have been banned from running for presidency. I think this comes from the conflicts that were conflicts that were created out of colonialism. You know, when colonizers would make alliances with one group to attack another. After the colonialists left, there was tension between tribes and all that. So that has made it very difficult. And half the time, like the people who might be in the ruling, who are in governance, normally might not get along with a different ethnic group. So that creates more tension. Anyways, let's look at urbanization. Bissau is a huge city relative to the country's size. Many of the large buildings were constructed by the Portuguese. The core of the city is a planned colonial capital with buildings and boulevards and vistas in the modernist style. The smaller district capitals also feature colonial architecture. There are post-colonial buildings such as Chinese Hospital in Kachungo, but the architecture is largely West African. Rectangular houses with zinc roofs and concrete floors are common in villages and small towns. In villages, much housing is still traditional in form and material. Dried mud and thatched circular huts in ethnically distinctive styles are a common feature. You know, people look at the architecture of African communities as uncivilized, or whatever you may want to call it, but actually in the actual sense, like, because during the hot weather with no air conditioning, those huts are actually really cool. So there is some explanation, good scientific explanation as to why people build those huts in Africa, right? And they're comfortable, but people have a way of looking at them as if it's very backward to build a hut. Anyways, moving on, let's look at the food and economy. Food, rice is a staple food among the coastal people. It's also a prestige food, and so the country imports it to feed the urban population. Millet is a sample crop in the interior. Both are supplemented with a variety of locally grown sources that combine palm oils, peanuts, tomatoes, onions with fish. Okay, let's look at the food customs. Most people particularly participate in the elaborate life cycle ceremonies in which family and community celebrates events such as birth, circumcision, marriage, and death. Most of these events, especially funerals, entail the sacrifice of livestock for consumption and ritual offering and the consumption of large quantities of palm wine or rum. All right, let's move on to the economy. The economy depends heavily on foreign aid to support the government bureaucracy, teachers and health workers, and the oversized military. The economy is basically agriculture. The vast majority of residents live off what they grow or their neighbors. Villages depend on funds from migrant workers, urban government workers at all, but the highest levels depend on their village kin for food. The West African franc is the used currency, which is French currency. Let's move on to land tenure and property. Traditional land tenure practices and systems of property ownership were not altered significantly by the colonial government or the independent state. A range of customary practices tend to protect the livelihood of rural families and protect economic cooperation in the village level. There are no landless poor, but with economic liberalization and attempts to generate and export income, the so-called empty-hand lands have been granted to members of the government, known as ponters. These concessions are enlarged extensions of earlier colonial practices. Ponta owners provide material for local farmers who grow cash crops in exchange for a share of the profits or the wages. Interesting. Let's look at the commercial activities in Guinea-Bissau. There is a thriving rural market in livestock and foodstuffs. Most significantly, Fula, Mandinga, and Balanta breed cattle and other livestock for consumption among the coastal groups who pay with funds repatriated by migrant kin living in Senegal and Europe. There is some local business activity in Guinea-Bissau, but farms are small and relatively unimportant economically. I don't know why they undermine the informal sector. Actually, the informal sector is very significant to the economy, but we have a way of undermining it. Anyways, let's look at the trade. Guinea-Bissau produces and exports cashew nuts, peanuts, fish, shellfish, and palm nuts. Export partners include Spain, Portugal, and Sweden. The country imports food, primarily rice, petroleum products, transport equipment, and consumer goods from Portugal, Russia, Senegal, and France. This is why I'm saying you can't undermine the informal sector, because most farmers, actually, some of the farming that's done contributes to the exports, right? Let's look at labor. In urban centers, women work alongside men in the government. Urban men who are not employed by the government drive taxis, work in local factories, are employed by laborers, sailors, dock workers. Urban women do domestic work and trade in the markets. In the villages, children herd livestock and young people work collectively to weed or prepare fields. Women do most of the domestic tasks. In most regions, women perform agricultural tasks that once were done by husbands. Let's look at the social structure of Guinea. In the colonial era, there were castes in Mandinga and Fula society, along with the specific occupational groups. Among the Manjako and Papel, distinctions were made between aristocratic groups and commoners. Aristocrats among coastal and Muslim people continue to enjoy the privileges of rank. Symbols of social stratification. Markers of wealth include business suits, cars, cell phones. In the villages, funerals in wealthy families involve large slaughters of cattle. The dead are wrapped in greater quantities of cloth, and the guests are more numerous and better fed. Yeah, it's It's actually pretty common in some areas of Africa. Let's look at the governance. In 1994, the country was a one-party republic with widespread participation and support. Today, opposition parties have gained considerable following, and the current president ran against the Revolutionary Party. The president selects a cabinet of ministers. Basic laws are enacted by the hundreds of delegates to the National Assembly who are elected by the universal suffrage. Since the 1990s, the government has increasingly privatized basic services and the industries, but continues to be one of the largest employee of workers outside the agricultural sector. Let's look at the leadership. Until the elections of 1999, almost all political parties and officials came from the ranks of those who fought in the revolutionary mid-level, and the regional leaders often come from local aristocratic families. Let's look at some of the social issues. Social problems include smuggling, corruption, and immigration of the educated. With joblessness high in the capital city, there has been a rise in crime and prostitution. This is hard. Okay, let's look about marriage. Marriage, rural Mandinga and Fula, the people of the coastal ethnic groups continue to practice arranged marriage in which a bride or groom service is given. However, young people can make matches of their own. Inter-ethnic marriages rates are low but increasing. Men marry later than women. Polygamy is accepted. Widows often remarry the husband's brother, thereby remaining the same domestic household group. Okay, the domestic unit in the villages. The domestic unit is a large kinship group with common rights of agriculture, property, and obligations to work for one another. Inheritance, land passes from fathers to sons or from older brothers to younger brothers. Among the Manjaco and the Papel, rice fields owned by domestic groups are inherited by a sister's son who acts as caretakers, managers, dividing use rights to portions of the fields. So you can't own land all by yourself. You have to share the land with the family, okay? Kin groups. In all the ethnic groups are organized in fairly large kin groups known as clans or lineages. Most kin groups tend to be patrilineal or patrilocal, although there are large categories of the matrilineal kin who share rights to land and to local religious and political offices. Let's talk about socialization. The infant care, high infant mortality rates result from the lack of modern health services. Child rearing and education is at the primary level and is almost universal. Higher education, in the colonial era, only handful of residents, primarily of Cape Verdean ancestry, went to Portugal for higher education. Guineans in Senegal received degrees from French colonial institutions. During the revolution, many young people were sent to East Germany, the Soviet Union, Cuba, and China to be educated at the university and postgraduate level. After the revolution, the government was able to increase the literacy rate and the numbers of students who earned a high school diploma. Some of these students study in technical schools, but it is still necessary to go abroad for training in a university. Many students with such education remain abroad. Again, it's very common because, you know, all these students are educated and there are no jobs. So the education system is not really helping with job creation. It's, you know, the training is focused on being an employee as opposed to employer. Okay, let's go to religion. Religious beliefs. Despite measures of Catholic and Protestant missionary activity, few people claim to be Christian. The overwhelming majority, that is 60% of residents, practice indigenous religion. Let's look at the ritual and holy places. The coastal groups believe their ancestor spirits exercise power over their living descendants, and those spirits are recognized in the household shrines with periodic offerings periodic offerings are made. In every village, there are dozens of shrines, all guardian spirits. These spirits are recognized at public ceremonies in which food and alcohol offerings are made and animals are sacrificed. Such spirits are thought to protect the community against misfortune. Over 30% of Guineans are Muslim and recognize their allegiance to Islam, although practices such as circumcision, fasting, and various forms of Islamic mysticism. The death rate, the most elaborate and expensive life cycle rituals are associated with death, burial, and the enshrinement of ancestors. Moving on to healthcare. Unfortunately, malaria and tuberculosis are rampant. Infant mortality rates are high, and life expectancy is generally low because of Western medicine. Because Western medicine is available only intermittently. Most residents seek out local healers, go to diviners, and make offerings as shrines. The government has made efforts to provide primary nursing care in villages, but the country continues to rely on foreign doctors. There is a hospital in the district of Kachungo, there, which is run by the Chinese medical personnel, but only employs European doctors. Cubans once provided advanced care in the hospitals of Bissau. Again, this is the danger in relying on foreign assistance for medical care. I feel like a lot of governments African governments are struggling when it comes to providing essential services like schools, education, medicine, and all that. Some of the good doctors are not well paid by government, so they take off to other countries, whereas we're spending so much money buying guns. Sorry, that's my opinion, but it's debatable. Share your opinion, please. Let's look at the secular celebrations. Independence Day is celebrated on the 24th of September in the major national holiday. Carnival in Bissau, once a festival associated with Catholic Creole culture, has become a multi-ethnic celebration. Let's look at the arts and humanities. Support for the arts. The national television program and radio programming provides some support for the arts. As far as literature goes, Amilcar Cabral wrote extensively on the goals and theories of national liberation. His speeches are widely read today. Guineans of Cape Verde ancestry such as Fusto, Teresio, and Jao Alves have begun to write fiction in Creole. The Manjaco poet Antonio has been published in Europe. Graphic arts. Arts tend to be religious and traditional, and is made and used by villagers. There is not much of a market for tourist art, but Bijagos Island produce carvings for tourist markets. Okay, so I believe we've come to the end of our fun art, culture, and lifestyle facts about Guinea-Bissau. I want to thank you. This has been compiled by courtesy of everyculture.com. If you want to check them out, please feel free to do that. Read to you by yours truly, Christine. Until our next video, please stay tuned. And if you want to watch the full video, please go to my YouTube channel, which is yours truly, Christine P. And you should be able to find me. Ciao for now.